The Helpless Ones by Ralph Rainwater Jr., recorded by the author on March 20th, 2020. Originally published in Ouroboros magazine, issue number 8, spring 1989. This is going to be my last day riding the city bus, Richard mentally promised himself. Sitting almost thigh to thigh with him on the bus stop bench was a lady of gross proportions. Curlers nestled in her hair. Bright red fingernail polish merely accentuated the unnaturally white flabbiness of her hands, just as the cigarette she held emphasized that hand's size by dwarfing it into a twig. Cars nosed by in the San Diego street. Sleek office workers strolled by on their way to the packed parking lots. But Richard's consciousness irresistibly centered on the woman whose near touch threatened to nauseate him. In the lady's monstrous lap squirmed a chubby boy of perhaps 4 or 5. She reached into a cavernous handbag and gave him a Three Musketeers candy bar. "Eat this and be still," she admonished him, taking a bite herself before he stuffed it in his mouth with all the glee of a born glutton. Richard abandoned the bench in favor of standing a safe distance away. Unable to remain still, he began pacing with the air of someone impatient to begin and complete a distasteful task. As the number 34 to La Jolla pulled up, Richard unconsciously straightened his back and tried to wipe any sign of dismay from his face. The curler lady heaved herself from the bench, grabbing her little boy's wrist and wrenching him along. She reached the door first, thereby treating Richard to a view of her tremendous backside, revealed by stretch pants as she climbed up the steps. "God, you're a chunker," he silently indicted her. Once inside, he noticed all the seats were filled except for a narrow spot in a front, sideways-facing seat, and one near the back, which held only Timmy, who appeared harried from battling to save his friend a space. Sure enough, the curler lady made a beeline for him. Richard cursed himself for not having jumped ahead of her, since, in the narrow aisle, passing proved impossible. Anticipating a scene, Richard fought back the urge to simply wave goodbye to his wiggling ward, for Timmy, torn between anxiety and joy, reminded him of a particularly ugly mutt who gets overly excited at seeing his master return home and walk off the bus. Timmy's exceedingly thin, nervous face showed signs of panic as he sought to transform himself into something larger to stave the woman off. "The seat's saved for him," he shouted, pointing a bony finger at Richard. His voice carried, high and tremulous, throughout the bus, catching the attention of most passengers. Twerp. "First come, first serve," replied the curler lady, who swung her butt around and started to plop down, never once loosening her grip on the boy. Timmy looked wildly at Richard for help before literally taking matters into his own hands by pushing her protruding behind with all of his meager might. "Why, you little creep, how dare you push me like that?" she bellowed. Timmy quailed under her glare. At this point, Richard reluctantly interceded. "Excuse me, ma'am, but to be honest, we always sit together on the ride home. Timmy here is just a bit excited. He shouldn't have pushed you, and he's sorry for doing so. Aren't you?" he asked Timmy, who nodded quickly. "Would you mind taking the seat up front as a favor?" All Richard's natural charm and politeness went into his request. "Like hell I will," came the immediate reply, and she started to sit again. Timmy shoved her again, too, bracing himself against the wall for leverage, since he possessed perhaps half her bulk. Propelled forward, this time she slammed directly into Richard, whose poise crumbled as he was knocked down the steps leading to the side door. He would have fallen out except for a saving last-gasp grab at the chrome railing bars. "You got a problem back there?" asked the driver, watching the scene in his rearview mirror. "Sit down, will you?" "Well, she ain't sitting here," said Timmy. The curler lady, defeated, let out an astonishing series of curses while jerking the boy with her to the front, where she wedged between 2 elderly men. Richard finally took his accustomed place. Amused and suspicious looks from some of the other passengers caused him to concentrate solely on the task at hand. From all the excitement, Timmy's tongue followed habit by flicking in and out of his mouth and over his upper lip, which glistened in a manner Richard found disgusting. "I think that lady's out for you, Tim," Richard said. Not sure whether he's being made fun of or not, Timmy smiled uncertainly, thereby displaying the unsightly gaps between his teeth. "Aw, man, don't say nothing like that. She just wanted to sit here." His eyes turned red, and for an instant Richard feared he'd provoked Timmy to tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything by it, really," Richard said, dismayed for both of them. "Don't worry nothing about it. It ain't your fault. Something happened today is all that makes me feel bad." Richard crossed his arms and turned his gaze to the floor before asking Timmy to tell him about it. "They've been making fun of me all this time, man. I thought maybe they liked me. They just been funning me instead," he began. By they, Timmy referred to the employees of a certain firm specializing in software for personal computers, where he worked as a janitor. "Has something been happening at work that you've kept secret? That's not like you," said Richard. Timmy stared out the window at the crowds of well-dressed, upwardly mobile people getting off work, heading for their Z28s and BMWs. Richard glanced up just long enough to notice, again, Timmy's protruding ears before resuming his study of the floor. A discarded cigarette butt lay there. He kicked it away. "I ain't told you nothing because it just seemed like some sort of dream. You know how all the brains there treat me. Sort of like I'm part of their garbage or something." "Yes, so you've told me. Especially the ladies. They look at me like I've got some sort of disease or something." Privately, Richard understood this. On those rare occasions when an attractive woman boarded the bus, Timmy stared at her with a peculiarly intense, yearning expression. To the best of Richard's knowledge, Timmy's experience with women was limited to being the object of their distasteful glances before averting their eyes. "A few days back, one of the ladies, a real pretty one, calls me into her office while I'm pushing my cart by. She's real pretty. You know what those women look like, don't you?" "You mean sleek," Richard said. "Everyone a potential model." "Yeah, sleek. There's a good word. So she calls me into her office and says one of the ladies there has the hots for me, that she's got a thing for men of my type." Richard groaned audibly. "You bought that?" "She was like some sort of, Timmy stalled, unable to find the word. "Goddess. Yeah, goddess. It was like one of them was talking to me, so I couldn't even think anyway. Then when she says one of them likes me, man, I nearly went crazy. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd believe me." "I certainly wish you had, Timmy." "I wish I had too, man." Timmy nervously fingered a small hole in a knee of his dirty jeans. They rode in silence for a few miles. Outside, the city gave way to extended suburbs, mile after mile of convenience stores, gas stations, chains of fast food places, all designed to support the condo dwellers who were busily arriving home or heading for happy hour at a nearby restaurant and bar chain. The bus slowly emptied. As passengers left, the curler lady moved nearer, working toward the back, her boy now on crackers. "So what happened next?" asked Richard. Timmy remained silent for another 2 blocks, and Richard didn't press. At last he stuck his finger inside the jeans hole and said, "They kept whispering about this perfect lady for me. I could hardly do my work, I was so jumpy and scared. I kept looking around, trying to figure out sort of who she was. Even the men kept saying things to me, like how they'd heard I had a babe after me, how they wished they was me." Richard threw his head back now, crossed his legs, and locked his fingers around the top knee. Foreboding made his stomach uneasy. "And today you found out who that lady was." "Yep. I was told to go into this here room. She'd be waiting for me. So I go in there when they say, and you know what I found?" Timmy's voice quivered as he fought back embarrassing tears. "A drawing." "A drawing." "Yep. A big one with them computers. Tacked up on the wall. She was real skinny, like one of them stick men you draw. She didn't got no teeth and had this straggly hair." Richard wished them dead. Their final destination being hell, preferably. "Were they waiting when you walked out?" "Yeah. They was laughing, too. Like this was the funniest thing they ever seen. I couldn't even move for a while, I was so scared. Then I done run out in the elevator and wandered." "Until it was time for the bus to take us home," Richard interrupted. From its gradually furrowing brow and look of total confusion, Timmy's face showed he was working toward asking a question. Richard prepared to answer whatever it might be, for in truth be told, these questions pleased him. Timmy asked them with total faith that Richard, no matter the subject, could answer. "What goes and makes people do something like that?" Richard's response came instantly. "I don't know." But inside his head ran the self-admonition, "Yes, you do know. Oh, yes, indeed you do, buddy." An insight struck Timmy, one he immediately passed on. "I think they got demons in them." Demons. Yep, demons, man. They're everywhere, I hear. I think they can go into a man and make him crazy or something. That could be, now that you mention it, said Richard. They neared the college area after a few more miles, and perhaps 20,000 stops had passed. Richard kept his arms crossed, feet locked together at the ankles. Timmy absently licked his lips and swallowed convulsively. As the bus approached the shopping mall Richard got off at, Timmy abruptly made his play. How about you and me going out and doing something tonight? It's Friday. I'd really like to go bowling or something. Not once since meeting on the bus had they spoken to or seen each other anywhere else, which was exactly how Richard wanted it. Now he almost agreed, but pushed the temptation aside with a great mental shove. Timmy, I'd like to. But I had plans already, honestly. My girlfriend Michelle would kill me if I broke our plans and went bowling. Besides, my average is about 25. Timmy startled and embarrassed Richard, unintentionally, and replied, I wouldn't want to go any place with someone like me neither. Richard offered a rush of assurances that he was telling the God's honest truth, that they were friends, forget how warped others were, and so on until the bus stopped at the shopping mall. He did not, however, offer to go bowling. Unnoticed by either of them, the curler lady had moved to a seat only one space ahead and to the side. She rose and turned to exit the side door simultaneously with Richard. They crashed. He fell backwards. She remained standing. He sat flat on his butt. "You creep," she said, glowering, while her chubette giggled from behind. The remaining passengers filled the bus with laughter, the two old men in front especially loud. Only Timmy inquired, "You all right, man?" Richard said he was fine, just fine, and hopped off the bus with a sense of immense relief. The curler lady immediately plopped down on a bench, waiting for a connecting bus. With his face turned down and away from her, Richard climbed the few steps leading into the shopping city. Though the bus would stop practically at the door of his one-bedroom apartment, Richard hopped off at the mall because Annie counted on his almost daily visits. Annie worked at the Baskin-Robbins. She was a recent acquaintance of 2 months, yet Richard felt their conversations had already done some good. He nearly gave himself a mental pat on the back for preventing her impending breakdown when they first met, but he shook his head and whispered, "Shut up," to stave it off. Through the village of expensive shops, groups of well-dressed men and women, some of them even together, wandered aimlessly, seeking a darling little something to impulsively charge card. Teens came into view when Richard approached the combination skating rink, arcade, fast food building. With the rage being new wave for both sexes, complete with baggy clothes and perfectly coiffured hair, the boys were only slightly less feminine than the girls. Richard doubted they'd ever seen a John Wayne film all the way through. Baskin-Robbins occupied one of the cubbyholes that dished out food around the skating rink. Upon catching sight of Annie at work, Richard shivered, blaming this on the unnaturally cold air. By almost anybody's standards, Annie's features were startlingly ugly, though not quite repulsive. She stood still, thin and slouched. Her swarthy skin was covered above the lip by an impressive black mustache. Bushy eyebrows sprouted above closely set eyes accentuated by a long nose. More than once during their visits, Richard had thanked God that, though he possessed serious doubts concerning his own appearance, he didn't have to suffer through life with a face such as hers. That more than homely face lit up with pleasure upon spotting her friend, her only friend, as she often told Richard. He, in turn, immediately felt despicable for boosting his worth at her expense. To compensate, he offered a particularly cordial smile, even a wave, before sitting at one of the plastic tables with swiveling chairs. He chose the usual table in a corner, which offered the illusion of privacy. Annie still had a few minutes until break and seemed ready to spend them simply smiling at Richard until a boy and his father walked up. Immediately her mouth, from Richard's viewpoint, started moving soundlessly yet steadily. "Oh, damn," he exclaimed out loud, causing a few glances from surrounding new wavers to be directed his way. "She's doing it again. I thought I'd stopped that a month ago." Unable to help himself, he moved to a table within earshot of the scene. The boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, had hair still wet from just being washed. "Ooh, been taking a bath, I see," said Annie. "Yes," said the father. The boy nodded. "Oh, I'll bet that felt good on a humid day like this," she enthused. When the boy didn't respond, Annie served up their order, all the while chatting about her two boys, how they felt about baths, what they said. Richard listened with astonishment. He knew for a fact that Annie was childless, and at 25 a virgin besides. The fabrication culminated with her stooping to the boy's face and saying in a mock child's voice, looking up at the father in a "I know how you feel" conspiracy with the boy, "Aw, Dad, I don't want to take a bath." The father stared at her, silently, for an instant before replying sarcastically, "Funny. That's what my little boy says." His tone, so breathtakingly harsh, nearly caused Annie to stop talking. Instead, she pretended her effort to make friends had been successful and said, "See, I knew it. Kids are always like that." She reached over the counter to pat the boy's head, but he backed out of reach. "Get some help, lady," the father said after finally receiving his change. He left. His son followed, willingly, unaided by a grasping hand. Richard nearly followed their example. At the same time, Annie bustled from behind the counter, practically dancing with delight to see him. Abandonment was out of the question today. "Richard," she twanged. "You've kept that little secret from me all this time?" Richard inquired. "What secret?" she asked as she joined her savior. "Why, your kids, of course. You never told me about the two boys." Annie's voice reflected honest confusion. "What boys?" "The ones you just told that man you have. Don't you remember?" "But you know I don't have any children. Not even a dog. Fish, though. I have lots of fish. They're so cute and quiet and—" Richard cut her off. "Then why did you lie to that man?" Annie's skin colored. "Oh, my God, I did it again. And after all you've told me, too." For the first time in 2 months, Richard spoke harshly to her. Yes, you darn well did." Remarkably unbecoming tears leapt to her eyes, causing Richard to look away. "Oh, my God, Richard, I'm sorry. Please don't be angry. I just wanted that man to like me. What else could I say that I would do that?" Richard's head pounded from pent-up pressure. Still, he tried to soften his manner with her to its normally feathery self. "But because of all that chatter, I think that man may just not like you, Annie." Her head snapped around to the direction the pair went. Then she stared at Richard with wide-open eyes. "Oh, no. Not him," she protested. "Surely he likes me. I'm just like him." "No, you're not. He's a man with at least one child, probably a wife, and he almost certainly lives in a nice residential section. He probably has a degree. You're Annie Ludmilla. No children, no husband, a tiny studio apartment eating up all your minimum wage income, and a high school education. You are a very different person from him." He noticed his fists clenched under the table and released them. Annie listened to this incomprehensibly, unable to see how these things made her different from anybody. Richard sent her away for coffee. When she returned, she said, "You know how glad it makes me when you come visit like this." "Well, I enjoy it too." Grinning uncertainly, she abruptly cast her eyes shyly at the table. Her left hand toyed with a mustache, stroking it spastically. "Since we have so much fun talking, I was wondering—" Her voice trailed off. Richard sensed an approaching storm and stiffened inwardly, being careful, however, to keep his expression flat. "Yes," he prompted. "I thought maybe you and me could talk outside of here. That way we could talk longer than my break time is," she said. When Richard kept silent, she blurted, "It wouldn't have to be a date or anything. I mean, just coffee someplace, not expensive places either. Denny's, or that little place next door when I get off work." An observer would have seen only Richard's normally placid expression, unaware that tucked behind it swirled an undercurrent of guilt. Unaccountably, to himself, he felt like crying. Instead, he smiled warmly and, steeling himself for the effort, reached over the table, taking one of her hands in his. Her wide thumbs and dirty fingernails made his skin crawl, so he made sure to clench it tightly. The startled look of surprise and pleasure she transparently registered didn't surprise him. He seriously doubted her hand had been held before. He stopped on an impulse to ask, "Will you marry me?" "Annie, dear, I only wish I could. But my girlfriend Monica would skewer me if she found out. Really," he said. Annie's face fell for only an instant before it became sympathetic. "Oh, my, I understand that. I can hear her now." She sat up straight in her chair. Quite a feat, given her slump back. then began shaking her finger at Richard. "Well, I never. Cheating on me after all we've been through together. Don't deny it. Weren't you drinking coffee at the restaurant next to where she works? And such a homely girl, too. I might understand it if she was gorgeous temptation, but this ugly, disgusting, stupid—" Richard watched and listened dismayed. He had never suspected she knew how others saw her. At the word stupid, he slapped his hands on the table. "Stop that," he commanded. "Big-nosed, ugly creep. She's not even a girl, I tell you." Richard took her face in his hands and brought his own close to it. "Stop that. You're not to say such things. I wouldn't be here if any of it were really true. Annie." Her attention slowly returned from some distant point beyond the window and centered on his anxious face. She noted the alarm with a sense of shame at having caused it, and pride at being able to cause it. Richard briefly considered kissing her, an act sure to cement his word's truthfulness in her mind. The act proved impossible. He couldn't bear being tickled by her mustache. A series of giggles intruded. Some of the new wavers were watching, derisively joking with one another. One of them, a boy adorned with mascara, called out, "You two are the cutest things since David and Maddie," at which the giggling broke into open sneers of laughter. Bewilderment reappeared on Annie's face. Richard reclined in his chair, trying to look as tough as possible, yet feeling helpless because knocking the crap out of the kid would merely put him in jail for assaulting a minor. Such children's parents, he knew, might never discipline their kids, but would be quite certain to punish anybody who did the job for them. Richard found refuge in the clock. "Break's over," he said, pointing at his watch. "I'd best be leaving now." "You're not mad at me, are you?" asked Annie. "No, not mad," he replied, and added, "Don't let those monsters get to you." "What monsters?" she asked. As Richard walked away, behind him the new wavers strolled over to the ice cream counter and forced Annie to serve them. He retraced his steps blindly, directional control set on automatic pilot. If he could be said to be thinking at all, it was only to question himself repeatedly with these words. What? Can this be the test? Abruptly, the bus stop bench in front of the mall loomed into view. The curler lady still sat, her boy munching on another snack from inside her apparently inexhaustible handbag. The scene had changed dramatically during the intervening 15 minutes, however. Two new wave girls, both barely in adolescence yet with the stance and gestures of much older women, hovered nearby, smoking and making loud wisecracks about the worthlessness of unsightly people. The curler lady didn't answer them. Only the sweat on her forehead and redness of her face gave way that she did hear and feel their words. The slightly older of the two, a blonde with a modified mohawk, poked her companion in the side, whispered loudly, "Watch this," and stepped directly in front of the curler lady. "You are such a chunker," she said. "Like, I don't even know how you can stand to live, you're so gross." She took a drag off her cigarette and waited for any reaction. None of the listening shoppers came to the curler lady's rescue. Richard watched her face crimson further, her mouth open and gasping for air. His eyes opened fully. "Jesus Christ," he said, before rushing forward, attempting to shoo the not-so-innocent children away.